What happens when the version of you the world falls in love with isn't the version you can sustain? That question sits quietly beneath the career of Ashton Kutcher, a man who, for a time, seemed to embody effortless success. Charming without trying, funny without effort, marketable without resistance. But that same simplicity may have also been the constraint that shaped everything that followed. Because Ashton Kutcher didn't just rise fast. He rose in a way that defined him too early. Before Hollywood, there was instability. Born in Iowa, Kutcher's early life wasn't built on privilege or access. His family struggled financially. His twin brother Michael was born with cerebral palsy and later required a heart transplant. Something Kutcher has openly said shaped his sense of guilt, responsibility, and urgency. There was a constant awareness of fragility, of randomness. That pressure didn't create a traditional artist. It created someone who adapted quickly and performed when necessary. In high school, Kutcher wasn't aiming for acting. He was drifting. There were academic issues, small brushes with trouble, and a lack of clear direction. At one point, he studied biochemical engineering, not out of passion, but practicality. Then something unexpected happened. He was discovered. Modeling came first, a gateway into visibility. Then auditions. Then, almost suddenly, a role that would define him in ways no one, including him, fully understood at the time. That 70s show. Michael Kelso. A character built on simplicity. Good-looking. Lovable. Not particularly intelligent. The joke was consistent and effective. Kutcher didn't need range. He needed timing, presence, energy, and he delivered. The show became a cultural fixture. Kelso became iconic, and Kutcher became recognizable. But recognition comes with a cost. Because the industry didn't just see an actor. It saw a product. Hollywood, especially in the early 2000s, operated on clarity. You were what the audience believed you to be. And Kutcher was easy to define. The attractive, slightly clueless, comedic lead. That identity opened doors quickly. Films like Dude, Where's My Car? Leaned directly into that persona. The premise was absurd. The humor was broad. And Kutcher fit perfectly. No transformation required. The film succeeded commercially, not because it challenged audiences, but because it confirmed expectations. And that's where the pattern began. Because every success that relied on that version of Kutcher made it harder for him to become anything else. But even early on, there were signs he didn't want to stay there. In 2004, Kutcher took a risk. The Butterfly Effect. A darker, more psychologically driven film. It demanded emotional depth, internal conflict, complexity, and surprisingly, it worked. Not perfectly. Critics were divided, but audiences responded. The film was financially successful, and for a moment, it looked like Kutcher might break out of the mold that had defined him. But here's the problem with breaking typecasting. You don't just need one success. You need consistency. And Kutcher didn't fully commit to that path. Instead, his career began to split. On one side, attempts at seriousness. On the other, a return to safe, familiar roles. Romantic comedies. Light performances. Predictable charm. Films like Just Married, What Happens in Vegas, and others reinforce the same core identity. Entertaining, yes. Profitable, often. But rarely transformative. And slowly, something subtle began to happen. Audiences stopped expecting growth. They started expecting repetition. At the same time, Kutcher's off-screen presence was expanding faster than his on-screen credibility. He wasn't just an actor anymore. He was becoming a public personality. This was the era of Punk'd, a show Kutcher created and hosted. It was chaotic, unpredictable, and built entirely around his persona. It amplified his likability, his accessibility, his image as someone who didn't take anything too seriously. And again, it worked. But it also reinforced a limitation. Because while other actors were disappearing into roles, Kutcher was becoming more visible as himself. Then came a shift that pushed him even further into the spotlight. His relationship with Demi Moore. It wasn't just a celebrity pairing. It was a media phenomenon. The age gap, the dynamic, the attention. Suddenly, Kutcher wasn't just being evaluated for his work, but for his life. And he leaned into it. Social media, still in its early cultural phase, became another arena where Kutcher thrived. He was one of the first major celebrities to embrace platforms like Twitter at scale. He wasn't just participating, he was leading. This mattered more than it seemed. Because while Hollywood still valued traditional stardom, the culture was shifting toward visibility, relatability, and access. Kutcher adapted early, but adaptation came with a trade-off. The more present he became as Ashton Kutcher, the harder it became for audiences to see him as anyone else. By the late 2000s, the trajectory was no longer upward in a traditional sense. It was sideways. He was still famous, still working, still relevant, but something had stalled. Critics weren't taking him seriously. Directors weren't pushing him into transformative roles. And audiences weren't expecting him to evolve. Not because he lacked ability, but because the system, and his own choices within it, had reinforced a version of him that was too easy to consume, and too difficult to expand. But the real shift, the one that would later redefine how his entire career was perceived, hadn't happened yet. Because while Hollywood was slowly placing limits on Ashton Kutcher the actor, Kutcher himself was starting to look elsewhere, toward something far less visible, and far more consequential. A different kind of power, a different kind of success, one that wouldn't rely on applause, or scripts, or public approval. And when that shift fully materialized, it wouldn't just change his career, it would change how people judged it. The question is, was this the beginning of his decline, or the moment he quietly chose a different path? And more importantly, did the industry reject Ashton Kutcher, or did he slowly start walking away from it? At what point does stepping away start to look like falling off? For Ashton Kutcher, that line wasn't clear. Not to the public, not to the industry, and possibly not even to himself at the time. Because what looked like inconsistency in his acting career was, in reality, the beginning of something far more intentional. But intention doesn't always translate well on the surface. And in Hollywood, perception is often stronger than truth. By the early 2010s, Kutcher was no longer chasing roles with urgency. He was still present, still working, but the pattern had shifted. In 2011, he stepped into one of the most scrutinized positions in television at the time, replacing Charlie Sheen on 2.5 Men. It wasn't just another role, it was a test. Could Ashton Kutcher carry a show that had already defined itself around someone else's identity? The answer was complicated. Ratings initially surged. Curiosity drove viewership. Kutcher brought a different energy, less chaotic, more controlled, but still accessible. But over time, the comparison never disappeared. He wasn't being evaluated on his own terms. He was being measured against what came before. And in that comparison, he could only partially succeed. Because the role didn't reinvent him. It simply repositioned him. Around the same time, Kutcher made a decision that, in hindsight, may have been one of the most misunderstood turning points of his career. He leaned into technology, not casually, not as a hobby, but with focus. Investments in companies like Uber, Airbnb, and Spotify weren't just financially successful. They were strategically early. This wasn't luck. It was pattern recognition. Kutcher wasn't just attaching his name to trends. He was studying them, understanding scale, disruption, behavior. And while the public still saw him as an actor trying to stay relevant, he was quietly building influence in an entirely different ecosystem. But here's where the narrative begins to fracture. Because Hollywood doesn't reward divided attention. And audiences don't always understand evolution that happens off-screen. From the outside, it looked like Kutcher's acting career was slowing down. Fewer major film roles. Less critical attention. A noticeable absence from the kinds of projects that define long-term artistic credibility. And that absence created a vacuum. One that was quickly filled with assumption. That he had peaked. That he had been typecast beyond recovery. That he simply wasn't capable of more. In 2013, Kutcher attempted something that should have shifted that perception. Jobs. a portrayal of Steve Jobs, one of the most complex, demanding figures in modern tech history. It was a role that required discipline, precision, intensity, and Kutcher committed to it physically and behaviorally. But the response was underwhelming. Critics questioned the depth, the nuance, the transformation. Some argued that despite the effort, the performance never fully transcended Kutcher's own presence. And that critique wasn't entirely new. It echoed a long-standing perception that no matter the role, you could still see Ashton Kutcher. That's the hidden cost of early branding. When audiences connect you so strongly to one identity, breaking away isn't just difficult, it can feel unnatural to watch. But while his acting credibility was being questioned, something else was strengthening: his credibility outside of Hollywood. Kutcher wasn't just investing, he was speaking publicly, confidently, fluently, about startups, about growth, about innovation. In rooms where actors were rarely taken seriously, he was being listened to, and that created a subtle but powerful shift in identity. He was no longer just an entertainer entering tech. He was becoming part of it. At the same time, his personal life underwent another transformation. His marriage to Demi Moore ended in 2013 after years of intense public scrutiny. The relationship, once a symbol of unconventional Hollywood success, had slowly become a source of speculation, rumor, and pressure. And when it ended, it didn't just close a chapter. It exposed something deeper: the cost of constant visibility, the strain of maintaining an image that the public feels entitled to interpret. Shortly after, Kutcher began a relationship with Mila Kunis, someone who had known him long before fame complicated everything. Their connection felt different, less performative, less exposed, more controlled. And that control extended beyond his personal life. It began to shape how he approached everything. By the mid-2010s, Kutcher's acting career hadn't collapsed, but it had clearly shifted. He wasn't chasing blockbuster films. He wasn't aggressively repositioning himself for critical acclaim. Instead, he was selective, measured, almost distant, and in an industry that thrives on visibility, momentum, and reinvention. Distance can be misread as decline, but the truth is more complex. Because Kutcher wasn't disappearing, he was redistributing his focus. From performance to ownership, from roles to equity, from being cast to choosing where he wanted to exist. And yet, despite all of this calculated movement, none of it protected him from what came next. Because while career shifts can be explained, public backlash doesn't follow logic. It follows emotion. And one moment, a single decision tied to someone else's actions, would pull Ashton Kutcher back into a spotlight he no longer fully controlled. Not as an actor, not as an investor, but as a public figure being judged in real time. And this time, the narrative wouldn't be about his talent. It would be about his judgment. The question wasn't whether his career had slowed. It was whether his reputation could absorb what was coming. Because in Hollywood, you can survive a bad performance. You can survive a failed film. But surviving public trust collapsing around you is something else entirely. There's a difference between fading out of relevance and being pulled back into focus for the wrong reason. For Ashton Kutcher, that moment didn't come from a film. It didn't come from a failed project. It came from association. And in modern public life, association can be just as defining as action. In 2023, a case that had been building for years reached a conclusion that forced a reaction across Hollywood. Danny Masterson, Kutcher's former co-star from that '70s show, was convicted on serious criminal charges. The details were disturbing, the consequences were severe, and the cultural response was immediate. There was no ambiguity about where public sentiment stood. But what followed next complicated everything. Letters, private letters, written to the court during sentencing, became public. Kutcher, along with others, had submitted a character reference for Masterson. The intent, from his perspective, was specific: to speak about the person he believed he knew. But intent doesn't exist in isolation. Context defines how it's received. And the context here was unforgiving. When those letters became public, the reaction was swift. Criticism wasn't just directed at the act itself, it was directed at what it appeared to represent. A failure to recognize the weight of the situation, a misjudgment of timing, a disconnect between private loyalty and public responsibility. And for someone like Kutcher, who had spent years building credibility beyond entertainment, that disconnect carried more weight than it might have earlier in his career. Because by this point, Kutcher wasn't just an actor. He was also associated with advocacy. Work tied to organizations like Thorne had positioned him as someone actively engaged in fighting exploitation and abuse. He had testified before policymakers, spoken about protecting vulnerable people, built an image that extended beyond Hollywood. And that's where the tension became impossible to ignore. The public didn't just see a letter. They saw contradiction. And contradiction, in moments like this, doesn't invite nuance. It invites judgment. Kutcher and Mila Kunis responded with a public apology. They explained the intent, clarified that the letters were not meant to undermine victims, acknowledged the pain their actions had caused. But by then, the narrative had already taken shape. And once a narrative hardens, it rarely reverses quickly. This wasn't a scandal in the traditional Hollywood sense. There was no crime committed by Kutcher, no hidden behavior exposed. But reputation isn't only built on actions. It's built on alignment. And for a moment, a very visible moment, that alignment appeared fractured. The impact wasn't immediate in measurable ways. There was no sudden collapse, no public blacklist. But something quieter shifted. Trust, perception, the way audiences interpreted everything that came after. And this is where the original question returns, but with more weight than before. Did Ashton Kutcher ruin his career? Or are we misunderstanding what his career became? Because if you look strictly at Hollywood metrics, the argument for decline seems easy to make. Fewer major film roles, limited presence in award-driven projects, a career that never fully escaped the shadow of early typecasting, and a controversy that complicated his public image at a time when perception matters more than ever. But that version of the story only works if Hollywood is the only measure that counts. Outside of it, the picture changes dramatically. Kutcher's investments weren't side projects. They were foundational. Early stakes in companies like Uber and Airbnb didn't just generate wealth. They positioned him within a different kind of influence. One that doesn't rely on box office numbers, or critical reviews, or audience expectations. He didn't disappear. He relocated. From visibility to leverage. From performance to participation in systems that shape culture at scale. And that shift raises a difficult question. One that doesn't have a clean answer. What is success supposed to look like? Is it consistency within a single industry? Or the ability to step outside of it before it defines your limits? Because here's the uncomfortable reality. If Ashton Kutcher had stayed exactly what Hollywood wanted him to be, consistently visible, consistently cast, consistently predictable, his career might look more stable on paper. But it might also be more constrained, less influential, less his. Instead, he chose something less linear. A path that fractured his identity in the public eye. Actor, investor, advocate, public figure navigating real-time consequences. And that fragmentation made him harder to define, harder to evaluate, and easier to misinterpret. The controversy didn't erase his past, but it altered how that past is viewed. The same choices that once looked like evolution, now to some look like inconsistency. The same distance from Hollywood that once suggested independence, now to others looks like disengagement. But none of those interpretations fully capture the truth. Because the truth isn't clean. It isn't binary. And it doesn't fit neatly into the idea of a rise or a fall. Ashton Kutcher didn't follow the trajectory people expected. And when people can't map a career onto a familiar pattern, they often default to a simpler explanation. That something went wrong. That something was lost. That at some point, he ruined it. But what if that's not what happened? What if the version of success we're measuring him against is the wrong one? Because the most defining choice in Kutcher's career wasn't a role he accepted, or a film he failed. or even a controversy he mishandled. It was the moment he stopped treating Hollywood as the center of his identity, and started treating it as just one part of a much larger system he wanted to be inside. That decision came with consequences. Less visibility, more scrutiny when he reappeared, higher expectations for how he carried influence outside of acting, and, eventually, moments where those expectations weren't met. But it also came with something else. Control, ownership, the ability to define success on terms that don't rely on constant approval. So did Ashton Kutcher ruin his career? Or did he step outside of the version of it that was easiest for everyone else to understand? Because those are not the same thing. And the answer depends entirely on what you believe a career is supposed to be. A continuous performance, or a series of decisions that lead you somewhere the audience didn't expect. And maybe that's the real story. Not a fall, not a failure, but a divergence. One that still leaves an open question. If success no longer looks like fame, how do you recognize it when you see it?